The Zilani represented ideal targets for this approach. Their civilization had dismantled its military centuries earlier. They developed advanced diplomatic protocols instead of weapons systems. Their cities had no planetary shields, no ground-to-space defenses, no contingency plans for invasion. Vorak scouts identified them as low-resistance, high-yield targets. Their pacifism became their vulnerability. Earth's strategists analyzed the tactical problem from multiple angles. Direct fleet engagement would fail. The Vorak outnumbered the expeditionary force significantly. Their ships carried heavier armor and more powerful weapons. Traditional space combat favored their doctrine of overwhelming force. Their command structure expected honorable battle lines and fleet formations. Human commanders understood they couldn't win through conventional warfare. The Vorak needed to be disrupted, not defeated. Their cohesion relied on predictable responses. Their tactics assumed enemy forces would protect military assets first. Earth's approach would need to invert every expectation. Protection would focus on civilian populations, not strategic positions. Engagement would prioritize disabling enemy capabilities over destroying enemy ships. The Vorak saw warfare as a means of consumption. Earth would teach them it could also be a tool of preservation. Their doctrine valued expansion above all else. Human strategy would demonstrate that some boundaries couldn't be crossed. The Zilani's vulnerability became the testing ground for a new form of galactic conflict, one where saving lives mattered more than claiming territory. Victory wouldn't come through superior firepower or numbers. It would come through superior understanding. The Vorak relied on terror as a weapon. Earth would use precision as its answer. Their war machine operated like a single organism with one purpose. Humanity would show them that some organisms learned to adapt. Some predators discovered they could become protectors. The calculus of conflict was about to change forever. 250 ships slipped into hyperspace without fanfare. Their jump signatures dispersed across 5 light-years of void to avoid detection. The stealth systems engaged immediately. Energy emissions dropped to background radiation levels. Heat signatures dissipated through phased radiator arrays. The fleet became ghosts moving through dead space. Vorak early warning networks covered standard approach vectors. Their sensor buoys monitored known jump points and trade routes. Human navigators plotted a course through gravitational anomalies and debris fields. The path added hours to their travel time but offered complete concealment. Ship crews maintained strict comm silence. Every system ran on minimal power. On the carrier decks, Marine teams conducted final equipment checks. They loaded medical supplies into drop pod compartments alongside weapons. Each soldier carried specialized gear for urban rescue operations. Thermal imagers for locating survivors through rubble, compact extraction tools for breaching collapsed structures. Their armor included emergency medical patches and trauma kits. Fighter pilots sat in cockpits with systems on standby. Their craft hung in launch tubes like dormant weapons. Navigation computers held attack patterns targeting Vorak engine clusters and weapons arrays. The goal was disablement, not destruction. Targeting solutions prioritized minimizing collateral damage near civilian areas. Bridge crews monitored passive sensors only. They watched Vorak patrol routes update on tactical displays. The enemy fleet moved with predictable arrogance. Battleships orbited population centers while smaller vessels conducted systematic bombardment. Their formation showed no defensive preparation. They expected no meaningful resistance. Commanders delivered final briefings through secure neural links. The message repeated across every ship: this was a protection mission. Engagement rules required positive identification of military targets. Civilian areas remained strictly off-limits for offensive actions. The rules of engagement favored defensive measures and precision strikes. Marines reviewed city maps downloaded from Zilani archives. They marked suspected shelter locations based on structural analysis and population density patterns. Medical teams prepared triage stations in carrier hangar bays. They stockpiled blood plasma and regeneration stims matched to Zilani biology. The fleet reached its emergence point precisely on schedule. Navigation computers coordinated the transition from hyperspace with microsecond precision. 250 ships materialized simultaneously behind the Vorak fleet's command structure. Their stealth systems disengaged at the last possible moment. Weapon systems activated in unified sequence. Targeting lasers painted Vorak engine compartments. Fighter launch tubes pressurized. Marine drop pods primed for atmospheric entry. The entire deployment occurred in absolute silence until the final moment. Then every ship opened fire at once. Energy beams sliced through Vorak propulsion systems. Missile volleys targeted weapons arrays. Fighter squadrons emerged like swarms of angry insects. Drop pods launched toward the planet's surface in coordinated waves. The Vorak command network erupted with confusion signals. Their sensors had detected nothing until the first impacts. Battle computers struggled to process the sudden threat from their rear flank. Fleet commanders issued contradictory orders as their ships lost power. Human forces achieved complete tactical surprise. Their emergence point placed them between the Vorak fleet and their supply lines. The enemy's numerical advantage became irrelevant against precision strikes from unexpected angles. Their formation began to fracture within minutes of first contact. The battle opened with overwhelming force applied to critical systems. Vorak ships drifted without power while their crews attempted emergency repairs. Human vessels maintained firing solutions on disabled targets but held further attacks. The message was clear. Resistance meant destruction, surrender meant survival. Human warships struck with surgical precision, then vanished back into the void. The Vorak fleet scrambled to respond but found no solid targets. Their larger battleships turned sluggish pursuit arcs while human vessels slipped through their formation gaps. The engagement followed no conventional patterns. Earth stealth destroyers approached from radar blind spots, fired controlled bursts, then retreated before return fire could coordinate. Stealth systems made the tactics possible. Ships ran dark until the final approach phase. Energy signatures dropped to match background cosmic radiation. Heat dissipation arrays bled thermal buildup into specialized heat sinks. The Vorak sensors detected nothing until weapons locked activated. By then, human vessels already had firing solutions. They targeted specific subsystems with disciplined focus. Engine clusters received precisely calibrated energy beams that melted housing connections without breaching containment. Weapons arrays suffered targeted missile strikes that severed power conduits rather than causing full detonations. Shield generators absorbed electromagnetic pulses that disrupted their harmonic frequencies. The attacks left Vorak ships drifting but intact, their crews alive but powerless. This approach confused Vorak command structures completely. Their tactical doctrine expected total annihilation attempts. They understood warfare as binary, destroy or be destroyed. Human tactics introduced a third option, neutralize without killing. Vorak admirals issued conflicting orders across encrypted channels. Some demanded aggressive pursuit. Others called for defensive formations. A few suggested retreat patterns. The lack of unified response created critical vulnerabilities. Human commanders exploited the disorganization. Fighter squadrons conducted harassment runs against Vorak vessels attempting to regroup. Electronic warfare platforms jammed enemy communications, increasing the confusion. The strategy focused on preventing any coordinated counterattack, rather than achieving immediate kills. Every disabled Vorak ship became one less threat to civilian populations below. The orbital battle unfolded across multiple vectors simultaneously. Human carriers positioned themselves between Vorak forces and the planet's surface. Their point defense systems created protective umbrellas over population centers. Any Vorak ship attempting to resume bombardment found itself immediately targeted by multiple stealth destroyers. The message became clear. Civilian areas were now protected territory. Progressive members saw a new model for crisis response. They analyzed the Zilani survival rates against predicted casualties. The numbers showed unprecedented civilian protection effectiveness. They argued that sometimes intervention prevented greater suffering than observation. This faction began questioning long-held assumptions about conflict resolution. The Zilani's previous council rejection now appeared tragically misguided. Their application had been denied for lacking defensive capabilities. The same pacifism that made them vulnerable became the reason for their exclusion. Council members who had voted against their membership now witnessed their near extermination. The irony hung heavy in diplomatic communications. Debates raged across secure channels about the nature of mercy. Traditionalists defined it as aid provided after violence concluded. Earth's approach suggested mercy could include preventing violence from occurring. This fundamental disagreement exposed a philosophical rift in galactic ethics. Neither side could easily refute the other's basic principles. Earth's council admission prospects transformed dramatically. Previously considered too militaristic for membership, humanity now demonstrated responsible power application. Their intervention showed restraint in victory and compassion toward enemies. These qualities aligned with stated council values despite the methodological differences. The Vorak Empire's expansion halted for the first time in recorded history. Their relentless conquest across 17 systems met unexpected resistance. Earth's expeditionary force demonstrated that their tactics could be countered. The balance of power shifted toward civilizations valuing protection over aggression. Multiple species requested emergency meetings with Earth diplomats. Their messages cited similar security concerns within their territories. They sought protection agreements rather than traditional alliances. This represented a fundamental shift in interstellar relations. The concept of protective intervention gained legitimacy through demonstrated effectiveness. The Altari Republic transmitted the first formal request for assistance. Their situation involved pirate raids rather than full-scale invasion. Their specific request for military protection confirmed the paradigm shift. They sought Earth's approach rather than conventional aid packages. This set a precedent that would echo through galactic politics. Council chambers became arenas for philosophical combat. Traditionalists warned of Earth becoming galactic police. Progressives argued for regulated intervention protocols. The debate extended beyond military matters into ethical foundations. What obligations did advanced civilizations have toward vulnerable ones? Could protection ever justify violence? Earth's ambassador addressed the council with measured words. She stated that their intervention served no territorial or economic interests. The motivation was simply preventing unnecessary death. This clarity challenged the complex political calculations dominating council deliberations. Sometimes principles required action rather than debate. The galactic power structure underwent quiet reconfiguration. Species previously intimidated by Vorak aggression now considered new options. Earth's demonstration of capability and restraint created unexpected alliances. The definition of strength expanded to include protective capacity. Mercy through action became a measurable strategic asset. The battleships became cargo carriers overnight. Their weapons systems powered down while cargo bays opened. Medical frigates that had treated combat wounds now delivered reconstruction materials. The mission shift happened without ceremony. Combat teams became construction crews. Soldiers who had cleared buildings of enemy forces now cleared rubble for new foundations. Military engineers worked alongside Zilani construction teams in the ruined cities. They used the same precision for rebuilding that they had used for targeting. Power grid repairs followed systematic patterns. Water purification systems came online sector by sector. The collaboration felt natural despite the language barriers. Both species understood the urgency of restoring basic services. Winter approached the northern continents with measurable certainty. Temperature drops showed on meteorological displays. Frost patterns already edged the shattered windows of broken buildings. The time constraint added pressure to every operation. Prefabricated shelters arrived in continuous shuttle runs. They provided immediate housing while permanent structures underwent repair. Human ships delivered specialized agricultural support alongside construction materials. They carried seed stocks compatible with Zilani soil chemistry. Hydroponic systems provided emergency food production. The same vessels that had carried Marines now transported farming equipment. The transition from war to sustainability happened within days. Soldiers who had fought through urban combat zones now built hospitals on those same sites. They erected medical centers where they had once taken defensive positions. School buildings rose from the rubble of former Vorak command posts. The transformation showed in daily progress reports. Reconstruction moved faster than the destruction had occurred. Zilani trauma specialists established counseling centers throughout the population centers. They worked with human psychologists to address collective trauma. Treatment protocols blended both species' approaches to mental health. The partnership showed mutual respect for different healing traditions. Survivors received care that acknowledged their cultural context. Children's artwork became a barometer of recovery. Early drawings showed burning cities and armored figures. Over time, the images changed. Human soldiers appeared as protective figures rather than threatening ones. Sunlight replaced fire in the backgrounds. The shift indicated healing on a fundamental level. The collaboration created bonds that formal diplomacy could never achieve. Human and Zilani teams shared work sites and living spaces. They developed simplified communication methods. Mutual respect grew through shared labor toward common goals. The relationship felt organic rather than arranged. Within 3 weeks, the first new settlements became fully habitable. They featured integrated power and water systems, medical facilities operated at capacity, schools reopened with combined human-Zilani teaching staff. The progress exceeded all initial projections. Life returned to the damaged worlds with quiet determination. Markets reopened with limited supplies. Cultural events resumed in protected venues. The Zilani maintained their traditions while adopting new practices. Their civilization remained fundamentally intact, despite the profound changes. The reconstruction demonstrated Earth's commitment, extended beyond military intervention. Protection included ensuring long-term stability and recovery. The same dedication applied to rebuilding as to combat. The ships that had brought liberation now brought renewal. The soldiers who had provided security now provided support. The transformation showed mercy included creating conditions for true peace, not just enforcing temporary safety. The work continued as winter's first snow began falling across the northern cities. 3 weeks after the Zilani intervention, the Altari Republic's transmission arrived. Their message reached Earth's diplomatic corps through secure channels. It carried the same urgency as the Zilani plea, though the scale differed. The Altari faced organized pirate raids rather than full-scale invasion. Their civilian shipping lanes suffered repeated attacks. Colonies on the outer rim lived under constant threat. The Altari specifically requested military protection, not humanitarian aid. Their wording mirrored Earth's own operational terminology. They asked for security forces to eliminate the pirate threat. This represented a fundamental shift in galactic politics. A civilization was asking for soldiers instead of supplies. They sought prevention rather than consolation. Their situation reflected the Zilani crisis in miniature. Pirates targeted civilian transports and undefended settlements. The pattern showed systematic harassment rather than conquest. But the underlying principle remained the same. Aggressors threatened innocent lives. The Altari recognized that passive aid wouldn't solve their problem. Earth's 12th Fleet received redeployment orders within hours. The vessels moved from patrol routes to intervention posture. Command staff reviewed pirate activity patterns. Intelligence suggested 3 main raider groups operating in Altari space. Their tactics involved hit-and-run attacks against soft targets. The Galactic Council monitored the situation through diplomatic observers. Some species expressed concern about Earth's expanding role. They worried about humanity becoming galactic police. Others saw necessary action in lawless regions. The debate reflected deeper tensions about intervention ethics. Traditionalists argued against military responses to criminal activity. They preferred diplomatic solutions and economic sanctions. Progressives pointed to the Zilani outcome as justification. The Altari's specific request complicated the opposition's position. A sovereign nation was asking for help on its own terms. Earth's leadership considered the request carefully. They analyzed the potential consequences of action and inaction. The pirate problem threatened to escalate without intervention. Criminal organizations could evolve into larger threats. Delayed response might mean greater suffering later. The decision came after thorough deliberation. Earth agreed to provide protective assistance. The 12th Fleet would deploy to Altari space under specific rules of engagement. Their mission focused on securing civilian areas and eliminating pirate capabilities. The agreement included provisions for Altari oversight. This established a clear precedent for future interventions. Other civilizations facing similar threats could request assistance. Earth would evaluate each situation based on established criteria. The approach balanced proactive protection with respect for sovereignty. Mercy through protection became an exportable concept. The Zilani intervention demonstrated the theory. The Altari response would test its practical application. Success could redefine security paradigms across the galaxy. Failure might reinforce traditional non-interference policies. The 12th Fleet jumped to Altari space within 72 hours of the request. Their arrival followed the same pattern as the Zilani operation. Stealth approaches, precise strikes, and minimal collateral damage. Pirates found themselves facing professional military forces instead of civilian transports. The operation concluded within days. Pirate bases were disabled. Captured vessels were secured. Altari shipping lanes reopened under protective patrols. The swift resolution demonstrated the effectiveness of Earth's methods. Civilizations across known space took note. The Altari outcome confirmed the Zilani result wasn't isolated. Earth's approach worked across different threat levels. Protection through precise force became a viable option for vulnerable species. Multiple governments began drafting similar requests. They sought protection agreements rather than traditional alliances. The galactic balance shifted toward proactive security measures. Sometimes mercy meant acting before harm occurred. Sometimes protection required willingness to engage. Ambassador Keithvar stood before the Galactic Council with a bearing transformed by recent history. His posture showed none of the diplomatic deference from previous appearances. The Zilani representative spoke as someone who had faced extinction and survived. His voice carried the weight of burning cities and lost lives. The council chambers fell into absolute silence. Even the translation systems seemed to hold their breath. Some council members watched with obvious skepticism. Their species had consistently opposed Earth's methods as dangerously militaristic. They saw humanity's intervention as violation of core galactic principles. Their expressions remained closed, arms crossed in traditional gestures of diplomatic resistance. They expected another plea for special consideration. Keithvar described the Vorik attacks without emotional embellishment. His words painted precise pictures of systematic destruction. He recounted the desperate plea for aid his government had transmitted, the request for food and medicine that would have arrived to empty worlds. He listed the civilian targets the Vorak had prioritized: schools, hospitals, cultural archives. Each target represented a specific philosophy of eradication. He explained Earth's response in measured terms: the arrival of ships carrying soldiers instead of supplies, the precision strikes that disabled Vorak capabilities without unnecessary killing, the marine teams that rescued civilians from certain death. He presented casualty estimates before and after the intervention. The numbers demonstrated unambiguous success. Millions lived because Earth chose action over observation. The Zilani endorsement carried profound weight because of their history. Their civilization had rejected violence for centuries. Their pacifism had been absolute. Their commitment to non-aggression total. For them to validate military intervention represented a fundamental shift. They weren't justifying violence. They were recognizing protection as another form of compassion. Keithvar argued that traditional mercy had limitations. Providing aid after violence concluded often meant arriving too late. True compassion required preventing harm before it occurred. Sometimes protection demanded willingness to act against aggressors. This didn't contradict peaceful principles. It fulfilled their ultimate purpose: preserving life. He presented Earth's philosophy as a potential standard for advanced civilizations. The concept that protection represented the highest form of mercy, that defending the vulnerable demonstrated greater morality than remaining neutral. His words challenged centuries of galactic diplomatic tradition. They suggested non-interference could sometimes enable atrocities. The council listened with unprecedented attention. Even skeptical members leaned forward slightly. Translation systems worked continuously to capture nuances. The usual rustle of movement and whispered consultations ceased completely. Delegates from multiple species made notes on data slates. The atmosphere felt charged with potential change. A visible shift occurred in how members viewed protective intervention. Previously abstract debates about intervention ethics gained concrete context. The Zilani experience provided measurable results instead of theoretical arguments. Civilizations that had opposed Earth's methods now considered their effectiveness. The balance between principle and practicality tilted toward new considerations. Keithvar concluded without dramatic appeals. He simply stated that his people lived because Earth understood mercy included action. Sometimes protecting life required defending it. Sometimes compassion meant stopping harm before it started. The quiet truth of his words settled over the assembly. The galactic definition of mercy had just expanded forever. The vote occurred without the usual deliberation process. Council procedures normally required months of debate and committee reviews. This time they moved directly to decision. The motion for Earth's admission reached the floor as an emergency measure. Delegates from multiple species seconded it immediately. The traditional bureaucratic machinery was bypassed completely. Some members abstained from the voting process. Their species had long opposed military interventions of any kind. They saw Earth's actions as dangerous precedents for galactic relations. Their concerns focused on humanity's willingness to use force. They worried about Earth becoming an unchecked galactic power. Their abstentions registered as silent protests against the changing norms. The majority viewed Earth's intervention differently. They saw a civilization that had demonstrated advanced ethical development. Protecting vulnerable species represented a higher form of morality. Mercy through protection became recognized as a legitimate approach. The Zilani outcome provided measurable evidence of its effectiveness. Traditional non-interference policies had failed to prevent the genocide. Earth's membership came with explicit responsibilities. The admission terms included obligations to protect other vulnerable civilizations. This marked a fundamental shift in galactic governance. Member species now had duties beyond their own borders. The Council moved from observation to active protection as a core principle. Earth would lead this new approach. The Zilani Confederation received provisional membership alongside Earth. Their admission recognized their unique perspective on protection ethics. Having experienced both pacifism and rescue, they offered valuable insights. The two civilizations would help shape galactic policy for generations. Their partnership demonstrated that different approaches could complement each other. President Carter received the news during a Zilani reconstruction update. Her assistant handed her a data slate with the Council's decision. She read the notification while engineers discussed power grid restoration. The timing felt appropriate. Earth's admission resulted from actions, not just words. The honor came with immense responsibility. She acknowledged both aspects in her response. Membership meant accepting leadership roles in galactic security. It required balancing protection with restraint. Earth would need to demonstrate consistent ethical judgment. Their actions would set standards for future interventions. The weight of this responsibility felt heavier than any military decision. The Council's decision rippled through diplomatic channels. Multiple species requested protective agreements with Earth. Their messages cited similar security concerns in their territories. The concept of mercy through protection gained legitimacy across known space. Civilizations began reevaluating their own defensive postures. Traditionalists continued expressing concerns about militarization. They warned against creating dependency on Earth's military capabilities. Their arguments maintained that true peace required diplomatic solutions. The debate would continue in council sessions for years. But the precedent had been established through demonstrated results. Earth's shipyards began retooling for new vessel designs. Protection-focused ships required different configurations than pure warships. They needed enhanced medical facilities and reconstruction capabilities. Military training programs incorporated civilian protection protocols. The changes reflected the new responsibilities. The galactic balance of power shifted permanently. Species previously vulnerable to aggression now had potential protectors. Aggressor civilizations faced new calculations about their actions. The rules of engagement had expanded to include preventive measures. Mercy became an active principle rather than passive observation. President Carter finalized the membership acceptance protocols. Earth would participate in council sessions immediately. Their delegation included both diplomatic and military advisors. The integration would require careful navigation of galactic politics. But the foundation had been laid through actions, not negotiations. Sometimes principles required demonstration before acceptance. The Galactic Council chambers became the arena for rewriting fundamental principles. For generations, non-interference had been the unquestioned doctrine. The Zilani intervention forced a painful reevaluation. Traditionalist species argued fiercely against change. They cited centuries of precedent and the dangers of militarization. Their position valued sovereignty above all else, even when that sovereignty allowed for genocide. Earth's definition of mercy gradually gained traction through undeniable results. The debate shifted from theoretical ethics to practical outcomes. Council members examined the Zilani casualty reports. They saw millions saved through decisive action. The argument that mercy could be preventive rather than reactive gained logical weight. It became harder to defend inaction in the face of proven effectiveness. The new guidelines for intervention established clear, strict criteria. Protective military action was permitted only when civilians faced systematic extermination. The threshold required overwhelming evidence of genocidal intent. The decision process involved multiple council species for oversight. It was not a license for unilateral aggression. It was a carefully measured tool for extreme circumstances. Earth agreed to lead coalition forces under the new doctrine. Their military had demonstrated the necessary restraint and precision. Their rules of engagement prioritized civilian protection above all else. This commitment came with significant strategic burdens. Human ships would bear the primary risk in future interventions. Their personnel would face the hardest decisions. Shipyards across human space began immediate retooling. Vessel designs shifted from pure warships to protection-focused platforms. New ships carried enhanced medical facilities and reconstruction equipment. Their weapon systems emphasized disabling capabilities over destructive power. The changes reflected the new doctrine's core philosophy. Military power served humanitarian purposes. Training programs underwent fundamental revisions. Soldiers now learned civilian protection as their primary objective. Urban rescue operations became core curriculum. Cultural sensitivity training expanded to include multiple species. The military's purpose was redefined around the protection mandate. They were becoming guardians more than warriors. The galaxy now possessed a tool it had lacked for millennia. Civilizations facing extermination could request sanctioned intervention. Aggressor species faced the reality of coordinated response. The balance of power shifted toward those who protected life. This did not eliminate conflict, but it changed its calculus. Mercy transformed from a passive concept to an active principle. It was no longer just about healing wounds after they were inflicted. It became about preventing the wound from happening at all. This represented a profound evolution in galactic civilization. Sometimes compassion required taking a stand against those who would show none. Traditionalists continued to voice concerns about precedent. They warned of potential misuse and mission creep. Their arguments maintained important checks against rash actions. The ongoing debate ensured the doctrine would be applied carefully. It was not a perfect solution, but it was a necessary one. The new standards began influencing other aspects of galactic relations. Trade agreements started including protection clauses. Diplomatic negotiations considered security guarantees. The concept of mutual defense expanded beyond traditional alliances. Civilizations began thinking collectively about safety and stability. This shift did not happen overnight or without resistance. Change of this magnitude always faces institutional friction, but the evidence from the Zilani intervention was too compelling to ignore. Sometimes principles must adapt to prevent greater suffering. The galaxy had learned that protection itself could be the highest form of mercy. Years later, the Zilani worlds showed no visible scars from the Vorak occupation. Their cities stood restored, their infrastructure modernized, their populations thriving. The reconstruction had been completed ahead of schedule, but the relationship with Earth continued deepening. What began as a rescue mission evolved into a permanent partnership. Joint administration offices operated in every major city. Shared defense networks protected both civilizations. Some Zilani expressed concerns about dependency on Earth's military capabilities. They worried their culture might lose its distinctive pacifist identity. Others feared Earth's influence would become too pervasive in their affairs. These tensions required careful diplomatic management. Regular council meetings addressed sovereignty issues and cultural preservation. Both sides committed to finding balanced solutions. Joint research facilities became centers of innovation. Scientists from both species developed new technologies for civilian protection. Advanced early warning systems could detect emerging threats across sectors. Shield technology evolved to protect entire cities rather than single ships. Medical research produced treatments for injuries specific to urban combat. These projects reflected the Alliance's core purpose: preventing future suffering. Zilani meditation techniques found unexpected applications in human military training. Soldiers used their mindfulness practices to manage combat stress more effectively. The techniques improved decision-making under pressure and reduced post-deployment trauma. Human psychologists incorporated the methods into standard training protocols. This cultural exchange demonstrated mutual respect for each other's strengths. The two civilizations blended their approaches to conflict resolution. Human strategic planning integrated Zilani diplomatic techniques. Zilani mediators adopted human crisis management protocols. The combination created more effective intervention strategies. It allowed for flexible responses ranging from negotiation to controlled force. This integration represented the Alliance's greatest strength. Children born after the war knew only peace and cooperation. Their education included both species' histories and values. School exchanges became routine between Earth and Zilani worlds. The younger generation viewed the alliance as natural and permanent. They embodied the successful merger of two different philosophies. Their perspective promised lasting stability. The Vorak Empire began tentative diplomatic contacts through neutral channels. Their communications suggested interest in normalized relations. This development surprised many galactic observers. The empire that had valued only conquest now sought dialogue. Their outreach indicated possible internal evolution. The process would require careful verification and gradual trust building. The galaxy learned that mercy and protection could coexist through demonstrated results. Earth's actions showed that military intervention could serve humanitarian purposes. The Zilani experience proved that receiving protection didn't mean sacrificing values. Their alliance became a model for balanced interstellar relationships. It challenged simplistic divisions between pacifism and security. Civilizations across known space reconsidered their definitions of compassion. Many adopted elements of Earth's protection doctrine into their policies. Some established their own rapid response forces for humanitarian crises. The galactic understanding of mercy expanded to include preventive action. This shift represented one of the most significant ethical developments in generations. Within 3 hours, the Vorak fleet lost effective command cohesion. Isolated battleships drifted without propulsion. Others floated with weapon systems disabled. A few attempted desperate ramming maneuvers that human vessels easily evaded. The numerical advantage meant nothing against precision strikes and tactical superiority. Their formation resembled a scattered flock rather than a military fleet. Earth's expeditionary force established full orbital control by the 4th hour. Patrol ships began systematic sweeps to confirm neutralization of all Vorak vessels. Medical frigates moved into stabilized zones to collect escape pods from disabled ships. The rules of engagement required offering aid to enemy crews who abandoned their stations. The space above Zilani worlds transformed from a killing zone to a secured perimeter. Human vessels maintained defensive positions while dropping sensor buoys for early warning coverage. The shift happened with methodical efficiency. One moment, Vorak ships dominated orbit. The next, they became floating husks surrounded by protective formations. Transport ships received clearance to begin atmospheric entry. They carried marine deployment teams and medical supplies instead of bombardment munitions. The orbital battle had achieved its primary objective, creating a safe approach corridor for ground operations. The real rescue mission could now begin in earnest, protected by silent guardians in the void above. Drop pods sliced through the atmosphere like falling stars. Their heat shields glowed orange against the twilight sky. Captain Jack Stone's team landed in a coordinated pattern across the city's northern sector. Their pods used retro thrusters for silent touchdowns, avoiding the telltale crash of emergency deployments. Hatches hissed open on compressed air. Marines emerged into a landscape of methodical ruin. The city lay broken under a blanket of gray ash. Buildings stood as hollow shells, their facades sheared away by precision orbital strikes. Streets were canyons of collapsed transit infrastructure and burned-out vehicles. Vorak bombardment had followed a clear pattern. Destroy capacity for resistance, eliminate gathering points, collapse transportation networks. The air carried the acidic scent of vaporized composites and ozone. Distant fires cast flickering shadows through the skeletal remains of towers. Captain Stone moved his team through rubble-strewn streets with silent efficiency. Their armor's dampening systems muffled footfalls. Helmet displays overlay thermal imaging and motion tracking data onto their visual field. The mission parameters were clear. Locate civilian shelters before Vorak sweep teams did. Intelligence indicated the Zilani used underground infrastructure for emergency protection. Subway tunnels, maintenance conduits, municipal basements. Vorak patrols moved through the city with chilling purpose. Their armored forms appeared on thermal scans as bright red blobs against cooler backgrounds. They worked in systematic search patterns, checking potential hiding places with methodical thoroughness. Their weapons remained active but not firing. They were hunting, not fighting. The absence of battle sounds made their progress more terrifying. No shouts, no energy discharges, just the crunch of boots on debris. Human soldiers avoided engagement whenever possible. They used alleyways and collapsed structures for cover. Motion sensors alerted them to Vorak movements blocks away. The priority was speed and stealth, not combat. Each Marine carried specialized equipment for rescue operations. Compact breach tools for sealed doors, medical kits with Zilani-specific treatments, emergency rations and water purification tablets. Their weapons were secondary tools, meant for defense only. They reached a district that showed signs of recent Vorak activity. Fresh boot prints in the dust. Energy weapons scoring on walls at precise heights. Captain Stone's helmet display highlighted a concentration of life signs beneath a collapsed administration building. The readings clustered in patterns suggesting organized shelter, rather than scattered survivors. Thermal imaging showed body heat concentrated in what appeared to be a large basement complex. A Vorak command post occupied the ground floor above the shelter. 2 armored vehicles sat outside, their engines still radiating residual heat. 6 Vorak soldiers maintained patrol patterns around the perimeter. Their movements suggested they knew about the civilians below, but hadn't yet begun extraction. They were likely waiting for specialized transport or additional orders. Captain Stone deployed his team with hand signals. Snipers took positions on overlooking rubble piles. Assault teams moved into flanking positions near the entrance. Medics prepared trauma kits and stretchers. The breach plan called for simultaneous entry at multiple points. Flashbang grenades would disorient the guards. Suppressed weapons would neutralize immediate threats. The goal was swift, quiet control of the area. They synchronized their attack with a Vorak patrol rotation. The changing of guards created a 15-second window of distraction. Captain Stone gave the execute order through neural link. 4 grenades arced through broken windows simultaneously. The concussions echoed through the hollow building structure. Vorak soldiers stumbled, their auditory sensors overwhelmed. Human teams moved through doors and window frames in coordinated waves. Their weapons fired precise 3-round bursts. Vorak body armor cracked under the impacts. Soldiers collapsed without returning fire. The entire engagement lasted 7 seconds. 6 Vorak guards lay disabled on the dusty floor. Human medics immediately checked them for life signs while other teams secured the perimeter. Captain Stone approached the basement access door. It showed recent welding work around the edges. The Zilani had sealed themselves in from the inside. He activated his external speaker, setting it to Zilani translation frequencies. His voice emerged calm and measured, filtered through linguistic software. He identified himself as Earth Marine Captain, here under Galactic Protection Mandate. The silence from below felt heavier than the battle just concluded. Then came the sound of metal scraping against concrete. The door began to move from within. The basement door slid open to reveal a scene of controlled terror. 73 Zilani civilians crowded into a space designed for storage. The air hung thick with the scent of unwashed bodies and fear. Vorak guards had welded the main entrance shut from the outside, converting the municipal basement into a temporary holding pen. They'd left only a small maintenance hatch for access, knowing their prisoners had nowhere to run. Captain Stone's team breached through that same hatch with practiced efficiency. 4 Marines entered first, their armored forms blocking the dim light from outside. They found 8 Vorak guards inside, their heavy combat armor making them appear massive in the confined space. The guards outnumbered the initial entry team 2-1. Their weapons were larger, their armor thicker, their physical size imposing. They turned toward the intrusion with unified aggression. Human response was immediate and disciplined. Flashbang grenades detonated simultaneously in 2 corners. The concussions disoriented the Vorak auditory and visual sensors. Suppressed weapons fired precise 3-round bursts into armor joints. The Marines targeted limbs and weapon mounts rather than center mass. 2 Vorak collapsed with disabled arm systems. Another stumbled as his leg armor cracked under focused fire. The engagement lasted 6 seconds. All 8 guards were down without a single lethal injury. The Zilani reacted with frozen terror. Children pressed into rear corners, their large eyes wide with shock. Adults formed living shields with their bodies, turning their backs to the confrontation. They expected new captors, not rescuers. Their culture had no reference for military intervention. Pacifism ran so deep that even defensive violence felt alien to them. They trembled as armored figures moved through their midst. Marine corpsmen immediately began triage operations. They moved past the disabled Vorak without second glances. Their focus shifted entirely to the civilians. Medical scanners assessed injuries in swift passes. 2 Zilani elders showed signs of oxygen deprivation. Several children had dehydration symptoms. A young female had a broken arm from rough handling during capture. The corpsmen administered oxygen, hydration packs, and bone stabilizers with efficient movements. Other Marines secured the perimeter without disrupting the civilians. They placed motion sensors at both entrances. 2 soldiers took positions covering the disabled Vorak, their weapons ready but not aimed. Their calm professionalism slowly eased the tension in the room. The Zalani watched in silence as these strangers worked with quiet competence. There were no shouted orders, no aggressive movements, just methodical action. Within 3 minutes, the area was fully secured. Captain Stone called for evacuation transports while his medics continued treatment. The Marines distributed emergency ration bars and water containers. They spoke through translation units in calm, measured tones. Their armor's exterior light softened to a gentle blue instead of combat red. The shift in ambiance felt deliberate, designed to ease civilian anxiety. The Zalani began to understand these weren't new captors. Their postures gradually relaxed. An elder reached tentatively for a water container. A child accepted a nutrient bar from a Marine's outstretched hand. The atmosphere transformed from terror to cautious hope. These people had prepared for death or enslavement. Instead, they received medical care, food, and protection. The sound of approaching transport engines overhead signaled their deliverance. Dozens of lives once counted as lost now had a future. The Zalani elder watched a Marine corporal treat a child's injured arm. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. Her voice carried the weight of a civilization built on absolute principles. She asked the question her entire species needed answered. Why did you come here with weapons? We asked for food and medicine, not soldiers. We believed violence was the failure of civilization. The corporal kept working as he answered. His hands moved with steady precision, applying a sterile bandage to the child's wound. His voice remained calm through the helmet speaker. He explained that Earth had analyzed their situation. Sending supply ships would have taken too long. The Vorak would have completed their work before aid arrived. Ships carrying food would have found empty cities. He finished the medical procedure and looked at the elder directly. His helmet visor reflected her troubled expression. He said true mercy isn't just about providing relief after suffering occurs. Sometimes mercy requires preventing the suffering from happening at all. Eliminating the threat becomes the most compassionate act possible. Protecting lives means stopping those who would take them. The elder struggled with the concept. Her people had spent generations perfecting nonviolence. They believed turning the other cheek represented the highest moral development. They had dismantled their military, rejected weapons research, and embraced dialogue as their only tool. Now she saw armored figures moving through ruined streets, their weapons still warm from recent use. They had saved her people through actions her culture considered barbaric. The corporal explained that Earth's history contained similar lessons. There were times when peaceful aid arrived too late to matter. There were aggressors who interpreted kindness as weakness. Some enemies could not be reasoned with or waited out. They understood only force. The Vorak fell into that category. Their doctrine specifically exploited pacifist civilizations. He gestured toward the disabled Vorak guards being treated by human medics. Those soldiers expected execution or torture. Their culture taught them that defeat meant death. Instead, they received medical care equal to what the Zalani received. That was part of the mercy equation, too. How you treat your enemies after defeating them matters as much as how you fight them. The elder watched human soldiers distribute food and water. She saw medics treating both Zalani and Vorak with the same professional care. She observed the precision with which they had disabled the guards without killing them. The violence she had witnessed wasn't mindless aggression. It was measured, controlled, and purposeful. Every action served the goal of protection rather than conquest. She began to understand the distinction. Passive mercy offered comfort after harm occurred. Active mercy prevented the harm from happening. One required compassion after the fact. The other required willingness to act before the fact. Her people's philosophy had focused entirely on the first approach. They had never considered that protection could be a form of compassion, too. The realization settled over her like a changed atmosphere. These soldiers weren't warriors in the Vorak sense. They were protectors who used force as a tool, not a purpose. Their violence served life rather than destroyed it. They fought not for conquest or glory, but to create the conditions where mercy could actually function, where aid could reach those who needed it, where compassion wasn't just a sentiment but an achievable reality. She looked at the children receiving food from Marine rations. They had expected death or slavery. Instead, they would grow up in a free world. That outcome required someone willing to stand between them and destruction. Sometimes mercy wore armor and carried weapons. Sometimes protection required accepting the burden of violence, so others wouldn't have to bear its consequences. Admiral Cross's flagship drifted in a debris field of its own making. The immense battleship trailed atmosphere from multiple hull breaches. Its main engines were dark. Weapon systems showed offline across the board, but life support still functioned in key sections. The command deck remained operational. The ship retained the capability for one final act of defiance. Human vessels surrounded the disabled flagship at precise intervals. Their weapons remained active but not firing. Targeting lasers painted the Vorak ship's remaining systems. The formation offered no obvious firing solutions. It created a containment field rather than a kill box. Earth's tactical display showed surrender demands flashing across multiple frequencies. Admiral Cross stood on his bridge watching the screens. His crew prepared for the expected end. Vorak doctrine demanded death before capture. Their training emphasized final stands over surrender. They expected no quarter from enemies. Their own treatment of prisoners guaranteed retaliation. Weapons officers powered up self-destruct sequences. Marine teams prepared boarding defense positions. The human transmission arrived clean and uncompressed. It offered medical assistance for wounded crew members. It promised humane prisoner conditions under galactic conventions. The terms included proper nutrition, communication rights, and protection from torture. The message repeated every 30 seconds without variation. Its calm tone contrasted with the tension on the Vorak bridge. Cross could not process the offer. His tactical mind searched for deception patterns. The concepts contradicted everything he knew about warfare. Mercy represented weakness in Vorak philosophy. Compassion indicated flawed programming. He expected boarding parties with torture implements or immediate plasma bombardment. Instead, he received polite surrender conditions. His first officer reported life signs fading in engineering. Multiple crew members needed emergency medical care. The ship's automated systems were overwhelmed. Cross faced a choice between certain death and incomprehensible mercy. His tactical training offered no guidance for this scenario. Vorak simulations always ended with destruction or victory. No scenarios involved peaceful surrender. Human ships detected the medical emergency. They launched unarmed shuttlecraft without waiting for response. The small vessels approached the flagship's damaged hangar bay. Their transmitters identified them as medical evacuation units. They carried trauma teams instead of marine boarding parties. Cross watched the shuttles dock through damaged camera feeds. He saw human medics entering his ship with medical equipment. They moved toward engineering sections where wounded crew awaited treatment. Their actions showed professional efficiency without hostility. They treated Vorak crew members with the same care they would give their own. The Admiral made his decision. He ordered self-destruct systems stood down. He instructed remaining crew to surrender weapons. The order felt alien on his tongue. It violated every principle of his training, but watching enemy medics save his wounded crew created cognitive dissonance. These actions did not match his understanding of conquest. He became the highest-ranking Vorak prisoner in history. Human forces secured the bridge without incident. Their soldiers moved with disciplined precision. They disarmed Vorak crew members without violence. They provided medical assistance to injured personnel. Cross observed the process with growing confusion. The treatment of his wounded became the defining moment. Human medics worked on Vorak injuries with professional detachment. They used advanced equipment to stabilize critical patients. They showed no anger or vengeance. Their actions demonstrated that surrender meant survival, not suffering. This contradicted every Vorak military doctrine. Cross began to understand this was not weakness. It was a different form of strength. His capture became less about defeat and more about education. He witnessed mercy applied to those who would never show it themselves. The experience planted doubts about his entire belief system. Sometimes losing taught more than winning ever could. The medical bay aboard the carrier Unity operated with calm efficiency. Wounded Vorak soldiers arrived on stretchers, their armor cracked and bodies broken from the recent fighting. Human medics moved between gurneys without hesitation. They administered pain medication, started intravenous lines, and prepared patients for surgery. The scene appeared no different from treatment given to human crew members hours earlier. Dr. Patricia Wells directed the triage process with sharp precision. Her voice remained level despite the tension in the room. Some human orderlies hesitated when approaching Vorak patients. These were the same soldiers who had tried to kill their comrades. One young medic questioned the protocol quietly. He asked why they should help those who would have shown no mercy to them. Dr. Wells answered without looking up from her work. She said civilized people heal their enemies. It was that simple. Morality wasn't conditional on the recipient's actions. Medical ethics applied to all injured persons regardless of affiliation. She reminded her staff that their oath required treating anyone in need. The Vorak's choices didn't dictate their own. The wounded Vorak expected very different treatment. Their culture taught that captives faced torture or execution. Medical experimentation was common for prisoners. They anticipated painful procedures and harsh conditions. Instead, they received professional care in sterile environments. Human surgeons repaired broken bones and internal injuries with advanced equipment. They used the same anesthetic protocols for Vorak as for human patients. This approach created profound confusion among the prisoners. Their belief systems couldn't process compassion from enemies. They watched human medics work with puzzled expressions. Some initially resisted treatment, expecting hidden agendas. They slowly realized the care was genuine. The pain management was real. The surgical repairs were competent. The recovery areas were clean and properly equipped. Dr. Wells moved between patients with the same professional detachment she showed everyone. She checked vital signs, reviewed treatment plans, and adjusted medications. Her actions demonstrated that medical care wasn't a reward for good behavior. It was a fundamental right of any injured being. This concept was alien to Vorak philosophy. The Vorak prisoners began asking quiet questions through translation units. They wanted to understand why they were being helped. Their confusion showed in their body language and hesitant speech. They had been prepared for suffering and degradation. Instead, they received kindness from those they had tried to destroy. Some human staff needed repeated reminders about the protocol. Dr. Wells held brief sessions between surgical cases. She explained that how they treated defeated enemies defined their civilization more than how they fought them. Mercy included actions after the battle ended. True strength showed in restraint and compassion toward those who could no longer harm you. The Vorak's gradual acceptance of care became its own form of victory. Their rigid beliefs began to fracture under consistent kindness. Prisoners who expected torture received pain management. Those anticipating execution got nutritional support. The disparity between expectation and reality created cognitive dissonance. Wounded Vorak started questioning their own doctrines in quiet conversations. They compared notes about their treatment. They realized the humans followed consistent ethical standards regardless of species. This challenged their core assumptions about weakness and strength. Their entire value system faced unexpected scrutiny. The medical bay became a classroom for a new galactic morality. Human actions taught lessons more effectively than any lecture could. Compassion toward enemies wasn't weakness, it was advanced civilization. How you treat those who sought to harm you reveals your true character. Earth was demonstrating that mercy includes everyone, even those who don't deserve it. The sealed shelters opened one by one. Zilani civilians emerged into daylight they hadn't seen for days. Their eyes squinted against the unfamiliar brightness. They moved cautiously, expecting Vorak guards and slave collars. Instead, they found human engineers restoring power grids. They saw medical teams setting up field hospitals. The scene felt dreamlike after days of darkness and fear. Elder Valana led her group from a municipal basement. She expected conquest and subjugation. Vorak doctrine offered only those outcomes. Instead, she witnessed human soldiers working alongside civilian technicians. They repaired water purification systems with efficient movements. They strung temporary power lines between damaged buildings. Their actions showed purpose without aggression. The contrast between expectation and reality created silent confusion. Zilani refugees watched from safe distances. They saw human medics treating both species with equal care. Wounded Marines received treatment beside injured civilians. The field hospitals made no distinction between protector and protected. This equality of care felt alien to their experience. Children emerged last from the shelters. Their large eyes took in the changed world. Marines who had been in combat hours earlier now distributed food packets. Their armored hands offered nutrition bars with careful movements. The soldiers had cleaned their armor but still carried weapons. The combination of military readiness and gentle care seemed paradoxical. Elder Valana approached a human engineer working on a power converter. She spoke through a translation device. Her voice held the hesitation of someone expecting punishment. She asked why they did these things. The engineer looked up from his work. He said they were restoring basic services. His tone was matter-of-fact, as if stating obvious facts. The elder struggled to process the response. Her people had begged for food and medicine. They had expected cargo ships with relief supplies. Instead, they received warriors who fought then built. Soldiers who destroyed threats then repaired damage. This dual capability contradicted her understanding of violence and compassion. She watched a Marine medic treat a child's injured arm. The soldier's hands moved with professional precision. The child gradually stopped crying. The Marine offered a small nutrient bar with a quiet word. The gesture showed kindness without condescension. It demonstrated that protection included emotional care. The Zilani had defined mercy as passive assistance. Giving aid after suffering occurred. They now witnessed mercy as active intervention, preventing suffering through decisive action. Their concept of compassion expanded to include preventive measures. Sometimes protection required willingness to act before harm happened. Elder Valana found herself speaking to a Marine captain. She expressed gratitude for their survival. Then she added unexpected words. She thanked them for their freedom. The distinction felt important. They hadn't just been saved from death. They had been preserved as a culture. Their way of life would continue because someone intervened. She began to understand Earth's definition of mercy. It wasn't limited to bandages and food shipments. True compassion included eliminating threats before they caused harm. Protection became the highest form of mercy when facing absolute aggression. Her people's philosophy had been incomplete. They now saw that pacifism required someone willing to be a pacifist on their behalf. The realization settled over the survivors gradually. They watched human teams work through the day. Engineers restored power to entire districts. Medics treated thousands of patients. Soldiers provided security patrols. The transition from combat to humanitarian aid happened seamlessly. The same people who fought now built. The same hands that held weapons now carried medical supplies. This integration of capabilities defined Earth's approach. They didn't see violence and compassion as opposites. They understood them as tools for protection. The Zilani's narrow definition of mercy expanded to include this complexity. Sometimes saving lives required taking action against those who would end them. Sometimes freedom required someone willing to fight for it. News of the intervention spread through galactic diplomatic channels at light speed. The reports carried conflicting narratives. Some transmissions focused on military engagements. Others highlighted civilian rescue statistics. Council members received both versions simultaneously. They faced a philosophical divide that challenged centuries of established doctrine. Traditionalist species condemned Earth's actions as excessive force. They cited multiple violations of non-interference treaties. Their communications emphasized the unilateral nature of the decision. They argued that protective violence remained an oxymoron regardless of circumstances. Their position reflected the galactic status quo that had existed for generations. When the Zilani Confederation's desperate plea reached Earth, they begged for food and medicine. Instead, Earth sent its fleet. What they didn't understand: humanity's mercy isn't passive aid, it's active protection. This is how 250 ships redefined galactic compassion through overwhelming force, saving millions while shattering an empire's war machine. The signal traveled for 72 hours across the void, a ghost carrying impossible weight. It reached Earth's listening posts as a distorted wave, compressed and weary from its journey. Technicians at the lunar array detected the Zilani diplomatic signature first, flagged it as urgent, and routed it straight to command. Ambassador Keithvar's voice emerged from the static, cracked with strain. He spoke formal galactic common, but his tone broke protocol. The words were a plea, not a request. He asked for emergency food shipments, medical supplies, basic relief. Behind his words, the sounds of his world gave the true report. Distant explosions rumbled like space storm static. Structural collapses echoed as sharp metallic groans. Earth's recording archives captured every repetition. The message cycled on multiple frequencies, growing fainter with each pass as Zilani transmitters failed one by one. Analysis teams isolated individual audio layers. They mapped targeting patterns from the bombardment sounds. Vorik energy weapons hit civilian sectors with surgical precision. Schools, medical centers, shelters marked with universal peace symbols. A junior analyst pulled the Zilani species file. Their application to the Galactic Council had been denied 7 standard cycles prior. Official reason: insufficient defensive capabilities. The Council deemed their absolute pacifism a security risk. Earth's own diplomats had filed similar assessments, calling the Zilani approach dangerously naive in internal memos. Now those same diplomats stood in silence as they listened. The transmission's background audio told the real story. Secondary channels contained open mic pickup from Keithvar's location. Children cried in a shelter below him. Medical teams shouted triage codes. The sound of falling debris grew closer with each transmission loop. One audio spike matched the sonic profile of a Vorak ground-penetrating munition. Command staff understood the unspoken message. The Zilani weren't just asking for aid. They were documenting their own extinction. Each burst of static, each scream, each distant detonation was evidence. The transmission wasn't a request, it was a testament. Ambassador Keithvar's final words came through clear. We placed our faith in galactic compassion. Then the signal cut to dead air. The silence in Earth's command centers felt heavier than the message itself. Officers looked at casualty projections. They watched Vorak fleet movements advancing toward Zilani population centers. The math was brutal and absolute. This was no humanitarian crisis. It was a siege against civilization itself. The Vorak weren't just conquering territory. They were erasing a culture that chose peace over war, dialogue over weapons. Earth's leadership faced a choice that would define humanity's place in the galaxy forever. They could send aid ships that would arrive to empty worlds, or they could send something else entirely. The Situation Room felt cold despite the body heat of 30 people. President Carter stood facing the main display, hands resting flat on the polished table. The projection showed the Zilani system in crisp detail. Red Vorak icons swarmed like blood cells around vulnerable blue worlds. Each light represented millions of lives. Each vanishing pulse meant another city gone silent. Admiral Morrison's voice cut through the low murmur of aides. He didn't raise his volume. He didn't need to. His words carried the weight of fleet deployments and casualty projections. The humanitarian option sat on the table like a condemned proposal. Relief ships packed with medical supplies and food, enough to sustain a population for months. Their projected arrival time put them at the Zilani homeworld in 14 days. Current intelligence suggested the Vorak would complete their systematic extermination in 9. Satellite imagery scrolled across secondary screens. Vorak ground forces moved through captured cities with brutal precision. They didn't just conquer territory. They erased infrastructure. Power grids fell first, then water purification. Communications hubs dissolved under orbital bombardment. The pattern matched 3 previous Vorak campaigns across the sector. They didn't leave survivors. They left resource-rich worlds empty of native life, ready for strip mining and colonization. President Carter watched the footage without blinking. She saw Earth's own historical parallels unfolding in real time. The failed aid convoys to besieged nations, the well-intentioned shipments that arrived to mass graves, the painful lessons learned across centuries of conflict. Passive compassion had limits against absolute aggression. Some enemies interpreted mercy as weakness. The Vorak doctrine specifically listed compassion as the exploitable flaw in target civilizations. Admiral Morrison placed both hands on the table. His uniform showed creases from hours of wearing body armor beneath it. He'd already prepared 2 sets of orders. One for the aid fleet, one for the 7th Expeditionary Force. His argument was tactical, not emotional. Sending supplies would make Earth feel virtuous while the Zilani died. True mercy required stopping the weapons instead of bandaging the victims. Protection meant prevention, not consolation. The President's security advisor countered with galactic political ramifications. Military intervention violated 3 core council treaties. Sending warships instead of aid ships would redefine humanity's standing. It might trigger broader conflicts. It could make Earth a target. President Carter listened to both arguments without interruption. Her eyes stayed on the casualty estimates. The numbers updated in real time as new intelligence filtered in. 5 million dead in the last hour alone. She finally spoke as the updated figures flashed crimson. Her voice held no dramatics, just flat certainty. The Vorak war machine couldn't be allowed to continue its expansion. Every conquered world made them stronger. Every exterminated civilization increased their resources. This wasn't just about saving the Zilani. It was about stopping a galactic-scale threat before it reached human space. The decision felt inevitable once stated aloud. They would send the 7th Expeditionary Force. 250 ships waiting at the Centauri jump point. Battle carriers, stealth destroyers, marine assault vessels. Their orders were clear and brutal. Protect civilian populations. Neutralize Vorak military capacity. Do not seek total annihilation unless necessary. The fleet would jump within 6 hours. Preparation orders went out before the meeting adjourned. Every officer in the room understood what they'd just set in motion. Humanity had chosen its role in the galaxy. Not as aid providers, but as protectors. The Vorak didn't conquer planets. They consumed them. Their military doctrine followed simple biological principles: locate resources, eliminate competition, absorb nutrients. Honor held no value in their calculus. Efficiency did. Terror did. Maximum extraction with minimal resistance. They fought wars like industrial processes, with civilian populations treated as waste products to be removed. Earth's intelligence briefing showed the pattern across 17 systems. Vorak fleets arrived with overwhelming numbers, typically 3-to-1 against local defenses. Their ships prioritized civilian infrastructure from the first engagement. Power grids dissolved under precision strikes. Communication networks vanished. Water treatment plants became toxic craters. The goal wasn't military victory. It was societal collapse. Orbital bombardment served as their primary tool. Vorak battleships hung in low orbit like patient predators. They didn't target military installations first. They hit cultural centers, hospitals, schools, residential districts. Their weapons calibration showed intentional cruelty. Energy beams set to widen destruction radius rather than penetrate armor. The goal was spectacle, not efficiency. They wanted populations to watch their world dismantle piece by piece. Ground operations followed the same doctrine. Vorak troops moved through ruined cities with systematic brutality. They didn't take prisoners for interrogation or ransom. They took slaves for labor camps. Survivors became resource assets. The weak and injured were discarded immediately. Their military manuals categorized mercy as a contamination risk. Compassion indicated faulty programming in their warrior caste.